3 weeks ago, I was reading a long Reddit thread about the biggest threat to Rolex, the most valuable luxury watch brand in the world. The top comment had over 1,000 upvotes, and it was making the standard argument that the real existential risk to Rolex's mechanical watch empire was the Chinese superclone industry. Noob Factory in Shenzhen, clean factory replicas. A $2 billion gray market crime wave that's now indistinguishable from the genuine article at the dial level. The comment cited the right numbers. On its surface, it was completely reasonable, and I almost moved on. Then I opened Seiko Group Corporation's most recent earnings report, and I realized everyone in that thread, including frankly most of the watch industry press, was watching the wrong door. Seiko had already started moving. The real threat to Rolex isn't a factory in Guangdong copying their case shapes. It's a movement Rolex literally cannot build without dismantling the brand position they've spent 7 decades constructing. And Grand Seiko, the Japanese luxury arm of the Seiko Watch Corporation, has now made that movement the centerpiece of an explicit corporate plan to double their revenue in the next 5 years. This is the Grand Seiko problem. The closer you look at the mechanics of it, the worse it gets for Rolex. Spring Drive is a watch movement Grand Seiko introduced commercially in 2004, after roughly 2 decades of development inside the Seiko Epson facility in Shiojiri, Nagano. The mechanism does something genuinely strange. It uses a traditional mainspring, the same coiled spring that has powered mechanical watches for 4 centuries. But instead of regulating that mainspring with a mechanical balance wheel and escapement, it regulates it with a quartz oscillator coupled to a magnetic braking system on a component called the glide wheel. The system is called tri-synchro, and what it does is unique in commercial horology. The mainspring drives the gear train mechanically, the glide wheel spins freely, and a tiny electrical current induced from that spinning is fed into a quartz crystal, which then sends a magnetic pulse back to slow the glide wheel to the exact correct speed. The visible effect is that the seconds hand sweeps continuously, with no ticking and no mechanical jitter. The accuracy effect is less subtle. A standard mechanical Rolex, certified to the brand's own superlative chronometer standard since 2015, runs at plus or minus 2 seconds per day. That's roughly 730 seconds per year, which is excellent by mechanical watch standards and substantially tighter than the COSC chronometer requirement of -4 to +6 seconds per day. For context, Omega's competing accuracy standard, Metis Master Chronometer certification, requires plus or minus 0.6 seconds per day when tested on wrist in magnetic fields up to 15,000 Gauss. That's a genuinely impressive standard, and it represents the current ceiling of what Swiss mechanical watchmaking can certify at scale. A standard Grand Seiko Spring Drive runs at plus or minus 1 second per day, already beating Rolex's certified standard and approaching master chronometer territory without a balance wheel in sight. But in 2025, Grand Seiko introduced something called the Ultra Fine Accuracy Caliber, the 9RB2, which is rated to plus or minus 20 seconds per year, not 20 seconds per day, 20 seconds per year. The accuracy delta over the best chronometer-grade movement Rolex currently sells is roughly 36 times. As of its launch, the 9RB2 is, per Grand Seiko's published specification, the most precise mainspring-powered wristwatch movement ever produced in the history of watchmaking. The watch press has not contested it. The obvious question is why Rolex doesn't simply build their own spring drive equivalent. The technology isn't a secret. It has been publicly documented for over 2 decades. The answer is that Rolex can't build it without invalidating their own brand. For the better part of a century, Rolex's marketing position and the position of nearly every Swiss luxury watchmaker has rested on a specific philosophical claim that mechanical purity is the marker of genuine horological luxury. That a watch powered by quartz, or by any hybrid involving quartz, is fundamentally a lesser object than a watch powered by an entirely mechanical movement. This is the argument that justified the price differential between Swiss mechanical watches and the quartz-driven Japanese imports that nearly killed the industry in the 1970s. This isn't a hypothetical. In 1969, when the Swiss watch industry briefly tried to compete with the new Japanese quartz movements head-on, Rolex was one of the consortium of Swiss brands that funded the development of the Beta 21 quartz movement. Rolex sold a oyster quartz model for nearly 2 decades and then quietly retired the entire program in 2001. The retreat back to mechanical only was not a market choice. It was a brand positioning choice. The mechanical Rolex was the luxury Rolex. That was the line. For Rolex to now build a spring drive equivalent, a hybrid quartz mechanical movement, would require them to publicly concede that the technology they spent 50 years calling inferior is, in fact, more accurate than the technology they spent 50 years selling at a premium. The strategic cost of that concession is unbounded. It is the entire brand premise. And notably, Tudor, Rolex's sister brand, which has leaned into Metis Master Chronometer certification for some of its own references, has not bridged this gap either. Master Chronometer and Spring Drive ultra-fine accuracy are not the same argument, and the brand firewall between Tudor's positioning and Rolex's would make any hybrid movement pivot even more complicated to execute across the group. This is what is meant by a technological lockout. Rolex does not lack the engineering capacity to build a Spring Drive equivalent. They lack the brand permission to release one. The financial consequences of this lockout are now visible in the published earnings. In the first half of fiscal year 2025, Seiko Group Corporation reported watch segment revenue of 98.2 billion yen, up roughly 9% year-over-year. The watch business now accounts for 61% of Seiko Group's total turnover. The operating margin on that watch business is 15.1%. For comparison, Richemont's Specialist Watchmakers division, which contains most of Swiss luxury watchmaking outside of Rolex itself, reported an operating margin of 3.2% in the equivalent period. Swatch Group reported 4.5% for fiscal year 2025. Seiko is producing watches at 3 to 5 times the operating margin of its largest Swiss competitors. The full-year picture is worse for the Swiss. For the 12 months ending March 2025, Seiko's global watch sales rose 11.7% to $1.22 billion. In the same window, Swatch Group sales fell 12.2%. Richemont's Specialist Watchmakers division fell 13%. LVMH's watch and jewelry segment fell 3%. Rolex does not publish financials, they are privately held, but the consensus reporting from WatchPro and Morgan Stanley is that Rolex is one of a small handful of Swiss brands still growing through the current downturn. The other Swiss luxury watch brands are not, and the structural margin advantage Seiko is operating with gives them resources for product development, retail expansion, and pricing flexibility that the Swiss industry simply cannot match at scale. Part of the margin gap is currency, part of it is scale, and part of it is something the Swiss cannot replicate even if they wanted to: vertical integration. Grand Seiko's mechanical movements are finished by hand using the Zaratsu polishing technique. This is a cold mirror finish process that requires individual craftsman skill, and Grand Seiko developed it over decades at the Shizukuishi Watch Studio in Iwate Prefecture. Those mechanical movements are assembled at that same Shizukuishi facility. The spring drive movements are assembled at the Seiko Epson facility in Shiojiri. Both facilities, along with case manufacturing, dial production, and component supply, sit inside the same corporate group. Seiko Epson, the same Epson that builds printers and projectors, handles quartz oscillator production at industrial precision and industrial scale. There is no comparable vertical structure inside the Swiss luxury watch industry. The typical luxury brand assembles movements built around components supplied by ETASA or Sellita. These are the two dominant Swiss movement suppliers, and the majority of the industry depends on them for base calibers and parts, with finishing performed in-house. When Swatch Group, which owns ETASA, periodically tightens supply terms, it sends structural tremors through the entire Swiss ecosystem. Seiko has no equivalent vulnerability. The margin gap is not an accident of accounting. It is the cumulative arithmetic of one company owning every step of the production chain. If you are watching this and you are actively in the market for a luxury watch in the $5,000 to $15,000 price band, this stops being an abstract industry story. It becomes a decision you may be about to make. A Rolex Submariner on the secondary market is currently trading at around $14,000, with multi-year authorized dealer waitlists for the privilege of paying retail. Grand Seiko's new ultra-fine accuracy Ushio diver, unveiled at Watches and Wonders Geneva in April, retails at $12,400. The Ushio is 40.8 mm wide and 12.9 mm thick. Those proportions, per Gray Market magazine, are very close to a Rolex Submariner. The Ushio runs the 9RB1 spring drive movement, and it is 36 times more accurate than the chronometer standard the Submariner runs. The pricing was not an accident. The case size was not an accident. Grand Seiko has been entirely transparent about what they are doing. The lockout is not only technological. The way Grand Seiko distributes and sells its watches is also structured directly against the playbook Rolex has been running for half a century. Grand Seiko only began selling watches outside Japan in 2010. The brand did not have a dedicated U.S. corporate office until 2018, when Aiko Naito, who is now president of Seiko Watch Corporation globally, was put in charge of the American expansion. By 2020, according to private market research cited in Watch Pro, Grand Seiko had climbed to the number 4 position in the U.S. $5,000 to $10,000 men's watch category, behind only Rolex, Omega, and Breitling. In 2024, Grand Seiko opened a flagship boutique on Madison Avenue in New York at over 3,000 square feet on the street level alone, currently the largest dedicated Grand Seiko boutique in the world. Total annual production for the brand is estimated by Watch Pro site at 75,000 to 85,000 pieces across mechanical, spring drive, and quartz lines combined. Naito has been explicit about the distribution strategy. The brand will not aggressively expand directly owned retail, and it will operate flagship boutiques only in key cities, paired with long-term partnerships with select authorized retailers. Grand Seiko has no intention of replicating Rolex's roughly 1,700-strong global authorized dealer network. This is the inversion. Rolex's entire pricing engine, the wait lists, the secondary market premiums, the relationship-based allocation system, depends on the authorized dealer network being the gatekeeper to the product. When Grand Seiko lets a buyer walk into the Madison Avenue boutique and leave with an ultra-fine accuracy spring drive on their wrist that afternoon, the brand is not just competing on the watch, it is competing on the absence of the friction that has been Rolex's most reliable revenue generator for 30 years. And Rolex cannot answer this by going direct, because the authorized dealer network is precisely what maintains the artificial scarcity that holds the secondary market premiums in place. To compete with Grand Seiko's retail model, Rolex would have to dismantle the most lucrative distribution structure in luxury watchmaking. One question worth asking is why this story is not being told more clearly in the mainstream watch press. The technical facts about spring drive are not hidden. The earnings reports are public. The Madison Avenue boutique is, in fact, on Madison Avenue. The answer is partly structural. The major English-language watch publications, the ones with the largest audiences and the most editorial influence, built their advertising businesses primarily around the Swiss luxury watchmaking ecosystem. Watches and Wonders. Geneva, the industry's premier trade show, is funded and structured by the Fondation de la Haute Horlogerie, which until very recently was effectively a Richemont-aligned organization. The watch journalists who cover these brands also cover them as event guests, as press trip attendees, and as recipients of loaned review units. The incentives to call the Swiss industry's competitive position structurally compromised, to use those specific words in a published article, are not symmetric with the incentives to write a favorable hands-on review of the latest novelty. None of this is conspiratorial. The same dynamic operates in automotive journalism, in fashion journalism, and in technology journalism. It is simply the economics of access. What makes the Grand Seiko trajectory difficult to dismiss as a single-cycle anomaly is that Seiko has stated the plan publicly. Under the corporate framework Seiko calls SMILE 145, the company has set the stated objective of doubling Grand Seiko revenue over the next 5 years. That is not analyst speculation. It is a written corporate plan from a publicly listed company, repeated across investor materials and global brand strategy disclosures. At a 15% operating margin, with a depreciating yen providing additional export tailwind, and with the ultra-fine accuracy spring drive technology that no Swiss competitor can credibly replicate without breaking their own brand position, the company has the resources to execute it. The Watches and Wonders 2026 release of 9 new Grand Seiko references, the Ushio Diver aimed at Submariner buyers, the Platinum Mystic Waterfall aimed at Patek territory at roughly $100,000, and the Ice Forest in solid yellow gold is what the first 18 months of that plan looks like. The Reddit thread is still up. The top comment is still arguing that the most serious threat to Rolex is a Chinese factory making counterfeit submariners. It has, as of this morning, around 1,200 upvotes. It is a comforting argument, partly because it is the kind of threat that does not require Rolex to actually change anything. A counterfeit industry can be sued, blocked at customs, attacked through enforcement actions. It is a threat from outside the system, and the system, by long practice, is equipped to handle it. The Grand Seiko threat is not that kind of threat. It is a threat from a competitor that has spent 25 years building a watch movement the most valuable watch brand in the world cannot build, distributing it through a retail channel the most valuable watch brand in the world cannot reproduce, and earning a margin on it that the most valuable watch brand in the world's closest competitors cannot approach. The plan, written down in shareholder filings, is to double the size of that business in 5 years. Rolex's worst enemy was never going to come from a factory in Guangdong copying their case shapes. It was always going to come from a factory in Shiojiri building something they could not.